Hey friends, happy Sunday and welcome back to another week of What's for Dinner. If you're new here, hello and welcome. I am Taylor. I'm a stay-at-home wife and mom, and I share these What's for Dinner videos every Sunday. I started doing them 5 years ago to help motivate myself to cook more for my family, and then they also help y'all to motivate you to cook more for your family and also give you some new meal ideas to try. I usually try about 3 new recipes a week. I like to switch things up. I don't like to always be cooking the same thing. It makes it more fun and interesting for me. So if you like these kinds of videos, I hope you'll subscribe down below. Now let's go ahead and get into this week's What's for Dinner. Friday night I made Brunswick Stew, which I have shared this before, but this week I made it in the crock pot, which I don't think I've done before. It's the same recipe pretty much as I have shared in the past. It has its own recipe video, but I started off by adding some diced onion and minced garlic to my crock pot, and then I did 2 cans of mixed veggies that I drained, and then 1 can of diced tomatoes, 1 8-ounce can of tomato sauce, 1 cup of your favorite barbecue sauce. This is really gonna determine the flavor of your Brunswick stew. If you use a sweeter sauce, it's going to be a sweeter Brunswick stew. I like a smoky, slightly sweet, vinegary barbecue sauce. And then I do 3 cups of chicken broth, about a half a teaspoon of hot sauce, salt and pepper, and some dried thyme. And then for the meat, usually I'll do 1.5 cups of cooked chicken or turkey, and then 1.5 cups of pork. What I thought I pulled out was some chicken and pork. Turns out they were both pork, so this was all just pork in this Brunswick stew, which it turned out fine. But the theme of this week's What's for Dinner is just cleaning out the freezer. So this pulled pork was from a couple months ago, and it wasn't labeled. So that's why I thought one was chicken and one was not. But I just put a lid on this and let it cook on low all day, 8 hours. And then to go with it, we just had some rolls. Saturday night was a super simple dinner. This is just some boxed red beans and rice. I cooked it according to the package directions and added in some smoked sausage. And that was it. That was a request from Elijah. And I was like, yep, I can definitely do that. That is a super simple dinner. Sunday night we had some crock pot chicken Alfredo tortellini. I have made this recipe before, but it has been a long time. I think it's been a couple years since I've actually made this. So I'm starting off by adding some chicken breasts to my crock pot. I did 2 chicken breasts, about a pound of chicken. And then I seasoned that up with some garlic powder, onion powder, Italian seasoning, and salt and pepper. And then I added in 1 jar of Alfredo sauce. And then I added half of that jar. I filled it up with milk. Shook it up, made sure I got all the sauce out of there, and then dumped that in the crock pot. And then I cooked this on low for 4 to 6 hours. And then you can take your chicken out and cut it up, which is what I prefer to do. We like it more of chunks, or you could just leave it in there and shred it up. But I prefer to take the chicken out, cut it in chunks, and then you can whisk the sauce up, make sure it's nice and combined really well, and add in some Parmesan cheese. And that Parmesan cheese is going to make the sauce look cheesy, but also help thicken it up a little bit. So I add in probably somewhere between half a cup and a cup of freshly grated Parmesan cheese. And then I add my cut up chicken back to the sauce. And then on the stove, I've got some salted water coming to a boil to cook up some tortellini according to the package directions. I'm only showing 1 package here. It's an 8-ounce package, but you do want to use 2 packages of tortellini. Or a total of 16 ounces. You can use the refrigerated kind, the shelf stable kind, whatever you want. Just cook it according to the package directions. And then when that's done, you can stir it in with the sauce and the chicken. And then we just like to top this with some more Parmesan cheese on top. You could do garlic bread on the side or salad, whatever you want. But it's super filling and delicious and pretty easy. Monday night was super simple. Just did spaghetti and meat sauce. And then this is the day that I actually did my Kroger haul, if you saw that on Friday. And so while we were at Kroger, I determined that I wanted a Caesar salad. So I bought a bagged Caesar salad kit, and we had that on the side as well. Tuesday night we did shrimp and grits, and this recipe is actually a family favorite. So I have shown it before, but it's been a while, I feel like, since I showed it step by step. We absolutely love this. I've only been making it for like 2 years, but it quickly became a family favorite. I started off by cooking up half of a package of bacon in my cast iron skillet. You want to get it nice and crispy. And then once that is done, you can remove it from the pan and leave the grease because we're going to fry up the shrimp in that grease. And then to season up the shrimp, I use the Tony's Creole seasoning. You could use Cajun seasoning, whatever you like. We like the Tony's Creole seasoning, so that's what I season up my shrimp with. And then I just cook that again until it is done and then remove it from the pan. And then you're left with a little bit too much like grease in the pan, so I remove most of it, saving maybe about 1.5 tablespoons to cook up my peppers in. And then the recipe calls for like 1 chopped red pepper, but my family doesn't like peppers that much, except for like raw. My kids really like these mini sweet peppers raw, so I always have them on hand. So I'll cut up like 2 or 3 of those, dice them up nicely, and then cook those up until they're nice and tender, maybe like 3 minutes or so. And then I also add in the whites from some green onions and some minced garlic and let that cook for about another minute till my garlic is nice and fragrant. And then I just reduce the heat to like a medium low, and I add in 1/4 cup of chicken broth, a teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce, and 2 teaspoons of lemon juice. Give that a good stir, and then you can add back in the shrimp and the bacon and just like let that sit on warm to warm back up the shrimp and the bacon. And then while all that was cooking, I was also working on my grits. I brought 4 cups of water to a boil, and then I added in about 1/4 teaspoon of salt and 1 cup of quick cooking grits, and let those cook with a cover on it for about 5 to 7 minutes until they've thickened up. And then you just want to add in about 3 tablespoons of butter, 2 tablespoons of heavy cream, and 1.5 cups of shredded sharp cheddar cheese. And then you just serve the shrimp and like bacon mixture over top of the grits, and it is absolutely delicious. I like to add some green onion on top of mine. And I've never tried any other shrimp and grits recipe myself. I've had it out to eat, and I don't know why I never had it earlier in my life. I love grits. I love shrimp. I love the combination of shrimp and grits. It is definitely a staple in our house. Back on to the cleaning out the freezer. We've got some ham in this that I had probably had in the freezer since Easter, and then some pierogies that I bought on clearance a couple months back at Aldi. So we are making this ham and cheese pierogi recipe that I found online. It's a 1 skillet recipe. So I'm starting off by melting 2 tablespoons of butter in my skillet, and then I'm adding in some diced onion. I only did about half of a diced onion, and then probably about 2 cups of chopped up broccoli. I'm going to be doubling part of the recipe, but I did not double the onion and broccoli. I just didn't want that many vegetables in it. It was also using up what I had on hand. About halfway through cooking the onions and broccoli, I decided to season them up with some salt and pepper, and then just continue cooking them until my onions were tender and my broccoli was tender to my liking. And then I removed those from the pan, set them to the side, and then I'm adding in my ham. I've probably got like close to 2, maybe 3 cups of ham here. Original recipe called for like, I think 1.5 cups. So yeah, lots of ham. It's cooked ham. It's cooked. We just want to like brown it up a little bit. So I let that brown up for like 3 minutes and then removed it from the pan as well. And then I added in a couple more tablespoons of butter and my frozen pierogies. I'm using 2 packages, so it's like 24 pierogies, and just lining them up in one single layer so they can all get browned a little bit. If I wasn't doubling this, they'd have a lot more room in the pan to get browned, but I just did the best I could. They all got a little bit crispy on one side. And then once they were crispy like that, then I just added in some chicken broth. I did 2 cups of chicken broth, put a lid on this, and let them simmer with a lid on for about 15 minutes until they absorbed most of that liquid. And then I added back in my broccoli and onion and ham, and then about half of a cup of heavy cream, and then topped this with some shredded sharp cheddar cheese. And then I put this in the oven under the broiler for like 5 minutes to get it nice and melted and crispy on top. and this was delicious. The best use, I think, of the pierogies that I've done. I made one time a casserole that we didn't really like, and then I've done another skillet meal, I think, with smoked sausage that we really liked, but I think this is my favorite one so far. I highly recommend it if you like pierogies, and if you got some ham sitting in your freezer that you want to do a recipe for, definitely give this a try. Thursday night, we tried a recipe called chicken stew. I've never made a chicken stew, but I knew I wanted to use up these chicken thighs. These came from my father-in-law. He said they were in his freezer for a really long time. So I don't know how old they are exactly, but I knew I wanted to use them up. So that's really the only thing that I changed about the recipe that I'm going to have linked down below for y'all, is I used some chicken thighs instead of chicken breasts. But you use whatever you like. So I'm starting off by seasoning up my chicken here. I did add a little bit more seasoning than the recipe called for as well. But it called for about half a teaspoon of dried thyme, half a teaspoon of poultry seasoning, and then some salt. So I did that, but I also added pepper and garlic powder and onion powder. And I think that was it. Oh, paprika, and paprika on it as well. And then I added in 1 diced onion, 2 stalks of celery diced, 4 carrots that I peeled and sliced, and then instead of, see, I'm changing more things. Instead of like russet potatoes, I used the baby gold potatoes. So it did change a little bit more. I lied. But I just really like the baby gold potatoes. And then I added in a bay leaf or 2 and 4 cups of chicken broth, and put a lid on this and let it cook all day. I think it was like low for 8 hours is what I did. It was cooking all day. We had a very busy day this day. Since I was making this chicken stew, I knew I wanted some nice homemade bread to go with it. It's been a while since I made homemade bread. I had a time where I was making it all the time, but I have not done that in a while. So I knew I wanted some to go with it. So I'm starting off here with 1.5 cups of lukewarm water. And to that, I'm adding 1.5 teaspoons of sugar. And then I'm going to add in 1.5 teaspoons of yeast. I'm using active dry yeast. If you are using instant yeast, there is different directions. I will have it listed out down below for you. It's got both ways. But you're going to want to let it sit for about 15 minutes if you're using active dry yeast like myself, so your yeast can activate and get all foamy. And then once it's nice and foamy, you can add in 3 cups of all-purpose flour or bread flour. I did use bread flour because I had it. And then also 1.5 teaspoons of kosher salt, and then you just use like a spatula and work it together until a nice sticky dough ball forms. This bread is so simple to make, and that's why I love it. I just put a towel over this and let it sit. It says to let it rise for at least 2 hours until it like doubles. It depends on like the temperature of your kitchen. We actually went to our friend's house this day though, and I let it sit on the counter for like 5 hours while we were gone. And it was fine. I came home and I deflated it with a fork, and you just kind of like pull it around the edges with your fork and form another ball, and then you can coat it with some olive oil, and then you're going to transfer it to a loaf pan that you've greased really well with butter and let it sit and rise again for about 45 minutes. I grew impatient and didn't let it rise very much. You want it to like rise up like over the top of the pan just a little bit and then bake it. I was impatient though. Once I had reached like the very tip of the top, like just barely reached the top, I was like, okay, time to bake it. And I stuck it in my oven on 375 for 45 minutes, and it came out perfect. It could have been taller, but I was impatient. I was ready for some bread and some chicken stew. But if you have the time, definitely let it rise a little bit longer and you'll have a taller, pretty loaf. But it was still absolutely delicious. And then for the chicken stew, you can pull out your chicken and shred it up. That's what I did. And then add in a little bit of cornstarch mixed with water, a little cornstarch slurry to thicken this up if you want it to be like a little more gravy-y versus like brothy. So that's what I did. Added in some cornstarch and my chicken that I cut up and let this sit for like 5 to 10 more minutes. And that cornstarch thickened up the broth nicely. And then we had our bread on the side, and this was absolutely delicious. So comforting. It was just before the first day of fall. We've gotten a little bit cooler days here in Georgia. The mornings and the nights are definitely cooler, like 60s in the morning, but during the day it's still like 80 degrees. But this is a nice, comforting meal, and I will definitely make it again in the fall and winter. And that's going to be it for this week's What's for Dinner. I hope that you guys got some new meal ideas. Don't forget, all the recipes that I mentioned will be linked in the description box down below. Make sure you leave me a thumbs up and a smiley face emoji in the comments down below if you made it here all the way to the end. I hope you all have a great rest of your weekend and a great week, and I will see you Tuesday for the grocery haul.